I was 61 years old when I finally understood that love can be just as dangerous as loneliness. 5 years earlier, if someone had told me that remarrying would almost cost me everything I spent my entire adult life building, I would have smiled politely and changed the subject. I was not a foolish woman. I was not naive. I was not desperate, or at least that is what I told myself. My name is Evelyn Carter, and this is my true story from Memphis. I did not inherit anything. No land, no business, no safety net. When I was 32, I was a newly divorced single mother with a 10-year-old son, a used pickup truck, and a small rented office near the Mississippi River. I worked in food distribution back then, coordinating deliveries between local farms and grocery suppliers. It was an industry run almost entirely by men who believed women belonged in accounting or customer service, not logistics and operations. They underestimated me. That mistake paid for my future. I started small. 1 refrigerated truck, 1 storage lease, long nights negotiating fuel contracts, and early mornings unloading pallets myself when drivers called in sick. There were years I slept on a folding cot in my office during peak season. Years when I chose which bills to pay late so payroll would clear on time. Years when I signed personal guarantees that would have ruined me if a single deal collapsed. But the deals did not collapse. Slowly, they multiplied. By the time I turned 45, I owned my first cold storage facility. By 55, I had 3 warehouses and long-term contracts with regional producers across Tennessee and Arkansas. My company was not flashy, but it was essential. Food moved because my systems worked. People trusted me because I never failed to deliver. By 60, my business was stable. Debt was manageable, and my assets were substantial. I was not a billionaire. I was something better, secure, independent, proud, and alone. My son had grown, moved out of state, and built a life of his own. My days were full, but my evenings were quiet. Too quiet. I would sit on my back porch in Midtown Memphis, listening to the cicadas hum in the summer heat, wondering when my life had narrowed to spreadsheets and silence. I told myself I was content. I told myself companionship was optional. But loneliness does not ask permission. It seeps in slowly, disguising itself as reflection, as rest, as peace. That is when I met Thomas Hale. He appeared at exactly the right moment, calm, attentive, respectful. A man who seemed impressed, not intimidated by what I had built. A man who listened without trying to fix me. A man who made the quiet feel less heavy. I did not know then that I was standing at the edge of the most dangerous chapter of my life, and that the only reason I survived it was because of one truth I chose not to share. I met Thomas Hale on a Thursday evening in early October at a community fundraiser in downtown Memphis. It was one of those events I usually avoided. Overpriced tickets, forced small talk, people networking under the disguise of charity. I had only gone because one of my longtime vendors was being honored for donating refrigerated storage to local food banks, and he insisted I attend. Thomas was standing near the back of the room, not holding a drink, not trying to be seen. He had that quiet confidence that comes from a lifetime of knowing how systems work. He introduced himself without urgency, without the rehearsed charm I had learned to distrust. "I'm Thomas," he said. "I used to help companies stay out of trouble." I laughed. That sounds exhausting. He smiled in a way that felt genuine. It was. That's why I retired. We spent most of the evening talking about ordinary things. The river, Memphis traffic, the way the city always felt like it was reinventing itself. He did not ask about my company until I mentioned it first. When I did, he listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, never once implying he knew better. That should have been my first warning. Men who understand power rarely reveal how well they understand it. Thomas was 66, widowed, and lived alone in a modest house east of the city. He spoke about his late wife with restraint, never using grief as currency. He told me he had spent his career as a compliance consultant, helping corporations navigate regulations and internal controls. It sounded dry, but his eyes lit up when he talked about problem solving. I recognized that look. It was the same one I got when a complex logistics plan finally clicked. Our first coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into weekends together. He never rushed me, never pressured me. When I canceled plans because a freezer unit failed or a shipment went missing, he didn't complain. He asked how he could help. I noticed the small things. He remembered my son's name. He brought books he thought I would like, not expensive gifts. He never commented on my home or my lifestyle in a way that felt evaluative. Compared to the men I had dated briefly over the years, Thomas felt safe, predictable, mature. When he told me about his children, it was with pride, but also distance. 2 daughters and a son, all grown, all living nearby. Successful, he said. Independent. Close as families go. I did not meet them right away, and at the time, I appreciated that boundary. 3 months in, he asked me why I had never remarried. I told him the truth. I had built something that required all of me. I did not have room for distraction. He nodded as if that answer made perfect sense. I understand, he said. I lost my wife, but before that, I lost myself trying to be everything for everyone. That line stayed with me. It felt honest. When he proposed the idea of marriage, it was quiet, no grand gesture, no audience, just the 2 of us sitting on my porch, the air heavy with summer heat. I don't need anything from you, he said. I just want to build something together, whatever that looks like. I believed him. Looking back now, I understand how carefully he chose his words, how nothing he said was technically untrue, and how much he left unsaid. Because while I was falling in love with the idea of companionship, Thomas was learning the shape of my life, and he was doing it very, very patiently. When Thomas and I began talking seriously about marriage, I did what I had trained myself to do in every major decision of my adult life. I slowed everything down. Love has a way of demanding speed. Business never does. The first call I made was not to my son or my friends. It was to my attorney, Grace Whitman, a woman who had guided me through acquisitions, lawsuits, and more than one near disaster. She had seen me at my most exhausted and my most decisive. If she hesitated, I paid attention. Evelyn, she said after listening quietly, I'm not saying don't get married. I am saying protect what you built. We drafted a prenuptial agreement that was clear and unambiguous. Everything I owned before the marriage would remain mine. The company, the properties, the land under every warehouse. No exceptions. Thomas reviewed it with his own counsel and signed without argument. He even joked about how romantic lawyers could be. That should have reassured me. Instead, it unsettled me. Because while the legal protection was in place, something deeper felt unfinished. A quiet tension I could not name. It was not fear. It was recognition. Over the next few weeks, Thomas asked gentle questions. How long the company had been around, whether it had always been under my name, how complicated the ownership structure was. Nothing overt. Nothing alarming, but the pattern was there. When his children came up in conversation, he mentioned they were curious about the business. Proud, he said. Interested. I smiled and nodded, keeping my answers general. I had spent decades learning how to speak in ways that revealed progress without revealing vulnerability. That was when I made the decision that would later save my life's work. I did not lie outright. I simply did not correct assumptions. When Thomas referred to the company as something I managed rather than owned, I let it stand. When he mentioned family assets in passing, I did not clarify. When the subject of property came up, I spoke about it as if it were layered, complicated, spread across trusts and long-standing agreements. I let him believe there were other hands on the wheel. Not because I planned anything, not because I suspected him of wrongdoing, but because something inside me refused to hand over the full map of what I had built. People often misunderstand this part when I tell them my story. They assume secrecy equals distrust, that if I loved him, I should have been transparent. What they fail to understand is that transparency without boundaries is exposure. And exposure is dangerous when you are the one holding value. I had been underestimated before. I had watched men smile while waiting for me to make a mistake. I had survived by knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. Marriage did not erase that instinct. If anything, it sharpened it. When we married quietly at a small chapel outside Memphis, I stood beside Thomas, feeling hopeful, grounded, and strangely alert. I did not feel guilty for what I had not shared. I felt prepared. Because the truth is this: if someone loves you for who you are, they do not need to know the exact price of what you own. And if they need that information to feel secure, then they are not in love with you, they are in negotiation. I did not know yet which category Thomas fell into, but I was about to find out. I met Thomas's children for the first time 3 weeks after the wedding. They came to my house on a Sunday afternoon, arriving separately but somehow together, like they had coordinated the timing. All of them were polite, smiling, perfectly appropriate. And yet, from the moment they stepped inside, the air shifted. His eldest daughter, Lauren, was the first to start asking questions. She worked in commercial real estate, she told me, which she said as if it explained everything that followed. She noticed ceiling heights. She commented on zoning. She asked how long the neighborhood had been trending upward. His son, Caleb, worked in financial consulting. He lingered near my office doorway, eyes scanning shelves and file cabinets with professional curiosity. He asked about long-term contracts, risk exposure, how diversified my revenue streams were. The youngest, Marissa, said little at first. She smiled often, nodded, watched. When she did speak, her questions landed softly but precisely. Who handled my legal filings? Whether I had ever thought about succession planning. If the company would remain in the family? I answered carefully, vaguely, always just enough. At first, I told myself they were simply protective, curious, a family trying to understand the woman their father had married. That explanation lasted exactly 1 visit. The questions did not stop. They evolved. Lauren asked whether I had recently updated insurance valuations on the warehouses. Caleb wanted to know if I had ever considered restructuring ownership for tax efficiency. Marissa asked if I had a will. Not gently. Not privately. Right there at the dinner table? Thomas never stopped them. That was what disturbed me most. He would sit back, hands folded, listening as if these were reasonable dinner topics. When I deflected, he smiled and said things like, "They're just trying to look out for us." Or, "Family planning is important at our age." Our age. It was subtle, but the language shifted. Us, ours, family assets, shared future. A few weeks later, Thomas slid a folder across the kitchen counter one morning while I was reviewing shipping reports. "Just routine paperwork," he said casually. "Beneficiary updates. Some authorization forms in case of emergencies." I read every page. 2 of the documents had nothing to do with emergencies. They granted financial authority, broad authority, the kind that allows someone to act on your behalf without supervision. I closed the folder and slid it back. "I'm not signing these," I said. He laughed, but it was thin. "You don't trust me?" "I trust myself," I replied. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument.